Welcome to another SOJC video tutorial on using the Canon R7. This is going to be a live demo of the menus on the camera, how to change settings using both the basic menu and then I'll show you the quick menu settings at the end. So to access the menus, it's this little menu button in the upper left. Turn it on, turn it off, turn it back on. One nice feature of Canon menus is that you never need to scroll up and down. So you'll see that there are, 7 tabs across the top, and then within each tab there's multiple windows, but you never need to go up and down. So everything is displayed on the screen, which is a great feature, not true in other camera manufacturers. The R7 is a touch screen, so you can touch any of these to get to the various settings. So that would be the autofocus settings. We'll go through some of those, playback, some of the basic tools and functions, that kind of thing. Or you can use the joystick to go through them all. So I'm not going to try and explain every single setting. You'll be happy to hear that. I am going to try and do some of the most basic and important ones. So let's start right at the beginning. The camera icon, the red menu. The very first one is image quality. That's important, obviously. To change any settings, you can either touch the screen or you can use the set button over here. Come in and out of those. So if you want to shoot JPEG, you would turn RAW off, and then inside of JPEG you've got various settings. We generally want to be in the highest quality, which would be the L, the very first L setting. So you can shoot smaller files, but there's no reason to do that. You really want to get the biggest file possible for the highest quality. If you do shoot RAWs, if that's something your teacher has talked about or you're familiar with, you can select the RAW mode. You can shoot RAW and JPEG, or you can shoot just RAW. So if you want to have a backup of JPEGs, which you might if you needed a quick access to it from your camera, but generally if you're shooting RAW, there's no reason to shoot JPEG as well. So anytime you change a setting and you want to set it, you can either hit the set button on the screen or you can just press set. I'm not going to go through the dual pixel, but the aspect ratio, the standard shape of the picture is a ratio of 3:2. That would use the whole sensor, so we normally use that. If you were working on a special project, say you were shooting a video and you wanted stills to go with your video, you might select the camera to crop your pictures for you to different sizes, but as a general rule, we can leave it at 3.2. So as I scroll across, I'm going to go to number 2. There's some settings here for exposure compensation and ISO. Those are things we can control other places. Not going to go through anything else on this page. The speed light would be if you were using a Canon flash. Again, white balance is something we will set, but we'll do that from the quick menu. But you could do it from this main menu if you wanted to. So you can set a white balance, what we call a color space, picture style, those kinds of things. In general, I would say do set your color space to Adobe RGB as opposed to sRGB. sRGB is better for on screen, but Adobe RGB gives you a wider range of colors, and you can always convert to sRGB, but you can't convert back without losing quality. So as a rule, I set my camera to Adobe RGB. As we go through, these are some specific settings for things that you can look at. Multiple exposure if you want to play around with that. Drive mode is something you might want to set, though there are other ways to get there. How many pictures will the camera take, how quickly? Single shot would be when you press the shutter release, you take a single picture. So I press, and even though I keep holding it, it's only taking a single photo. If I want to be able to take multiple photos at a time, I can set that to a range of very high, low, that kind of thing. So I normally keep it on high so I can take lots of pictures if I need to. So that would be the high mode. The only time I might turn that off is if I was in a place where I was trying to be a little bit more discreet. If I was shooting in church or in a place where I wanted to be a little quieter, I might set it to single, so I was only taking a single picture at a time. But the silent shutter function allows you to turn off the noise of the shutter. It can be great, again, in a place where you're trying to be a little bit more discreet. I can touch it that way. I will say one of the problems is that you won't know that you're taking a picture either. You'll see the camera just flicker a little bit. I just took maybe 6 or 7 pictures and there's no noise, so sometimes you can get into trouble by taking too many pictures that way. So I'm going to turn that off. And as we continue through the menu, image stabilization helps steady the camera at slow shutter speeds. Generally, you want that on. You can set the screen to allow you to take pictures. You can control how the image is reviewed when you look at it. Those are all things you can explore on your own. There's nothing really on that page. The last one in the camera setting is for shooting video. We're not going to talk too much about video in this tutorial. But if you wanted to change from HD to 4K, how the sound was recorded, ISO settings, all those things specific to video you would do in this menu. So let's bounce over to autofocus. All right, so in the autofocus mode, we're going to explore some of this in specific tutorials, and we can control a lot of this from the Q menu that we'll talk about. But this is where you get into the nitty-gritty of setting autofocus. So you can control, for example, how quickly the autofocus tracks a moving object. So for certain kinds of sports, you might change the settings. There's a lot to explore here that we're not going to spend a lot of time on in this tutorial. The subject to detect is whether you want to focus on people or animals, that kind of thing. You can turn eye detection on. So in this case, it's turned on. If you want to turn it off, now it's disabled. The camera will do its best to find the eye of a person or an animal. All sorts of things to explore here. All of these autofocus settings are things you can look at on your own. As you get more comfortable with the camera, you can set it to be specific to how you're shooting and what kinds of things you're shooting. This is controlling what the playback menu is like when you look at your pictures on your camera. You can protect an image so you can't delete it accidentally. You can delete images, rotate them, that kind of thing. You can order books online, I suppose. There's some deeper dives here into things we're just not going to deal with for this tutorial. I think you can leave all of these just at the default and you'll be fine, at least to start. If you do want to connect your camera via Wi-Fi to, say, to your phone, to control it from your phone, there's a Canon app. You can do that. You would use this app. This is the tools. You can label the photos. You can set a custom, so you could put your initials on all your photos. That would be useful if you were shooting with other people and were trying to keep your images separate from theirs. The most important thing in this one is the format card. This is how you erase your card, but it does more than erase it. It cleans it and sets it up to be fresh for a new shoot. So best practice is you shoot an assignment. The first thing you do is download all those images off of the card. You don't look at them while they're in the camera. You don't look at them on your SD card. You download them and you back them up. So they'll be on your computer and an external hard drive, or they'll be on an external hard drive and you'll move them up to Dropbox. You want to have a couple of versions of everything somewhere safe. As soon as you put the card back in the camera, you want to erase it and format it. You want to clean it up so it's ready for the next shoot. So you'd come to Format, and again, you can use the button or your finger. If you have two cards in the camera, you can format one or the other. You do them one at a time, but let's say we're formatting the first card. Remember that you're deleting everything. You'd hit OK, and I've just erased everything on the camera. So hopefully that was OK. Takes a couple of seconds, depending on how big the card is, and then you're good to go. You can set the date and time zone for your camera, and that'll be attached to your individual image files, so someone could see when your pictures were taken. That can be useful. But the format is definitely one you'll come to a lot. So remember, it's in the gear, the very first page. You can set different languages. You can control the volume of things, whether the camera beeps at certain points. You can adjust the brightness of the screen, how much of the screen is touch controlled or not. You can change that. You can reset everything. If you're ever running into problems or you've signed out a camera and things are super weird, you might come into this and reset the camera, go right back to the basics. You can check the battery information, that kind of thing. And then there are some adjustments to settings in here that once you get more comfortable again with the camera, you can explore, but you can change things to sort of fit your needs. If you've come from another camera system where turning to the right focuses one way or the left, you can switch Canon lenses to just something that you're more familiar with. Nikon cameras are usually the reverse of Canon cameras, so that's something you might want to do. So the one button I typically customize, and I can show you how you do that and how you would do any of them, is this button up here. That's the AF on button. So I changed that to be an AF lock button, and I'll show you why in a second. But I'd come into customize buttons. I'll select that. I'm going to come down. This is a case where you do have to scroll down. I'm going to find that button. So here it is, AF on. And you can see I've got it set to AF stop. But if I wanted that button to do any number of things, I could. I could make that button my ISO button. I could make it the eye detection button, whatever I want. But in this case, I like it set to AF off, so I'm going to set it to that. And I'll show you briefly how I use that function. So this picture is a little bit bright. Darken that up so it's proper. We'll talk more about autofocus, but if my camera is focusing continuously, what Canon calls the servo mode, so let me show that. You can see I'm in the servo mode right here. The camera, as long as I'm depressing the shutter, is going to keep focusing. If briefly for a moment I wanted to stop focusing, I've now set this button that if I press it and hold it, the camera won't focus anymore, even if I'm touching the shutter button. So that can be a useful, quick way to lock on something and hold that focus. So that's one of the custom buttons I might set. But as you could see, there's just all sorts of options. You can change almost every button on the camera. You can change to something else. So it's coming back into the menu. You can do the same with some of the dials. Bunch of things in here that you can explore if you like. And that's the basic menus. So there's really only a few key settings in here, and probably the most important one to remember is under the gear on the first tab, the format card, because you'll need to get to that one pretty regularly. So that's the deep dive into the menus. The Q button gives you access to the most important settings that you might change on a regular basis. Q for quick. So this is where we'll set autofocus settings, and we'll explore that in another video. But you can change what it's focusing on. You can change it from one shot to servo. You can change the cards quickly from RAW to JPEG. You can change the drive mode from continuous to single. So all of this is accessible quickly through the Q menu. And then on the right-hand side, the flicker button is actually useful if you're in a room with fluorescent lights or like sodium vapor lights, and if you take a picture and see banding in your photo, so that can be caused by the flickering of lights, and you can turn that function on and the camera will start to detect that, and will try to adjust the shutter speed slightly to reduce the flicker. It can slow down how quickly you're able to shoot. So generally we leave that off unless we're in that kind of situation, but it's something to remember to do if you need it. You can change your white balance from the quick menu. You can use some creative filters, but as journalists in a journalism class, we would always leave that off. And we can change this from object recognition to nothing. So we can have it search for people in the picture. It can also search for animals, slightly different. If you're shooting cars or car racing, you might turn on vehicle recognition. Or if you're finding that the focus is just going all over the place and you want more control, we can turn that off. So those are the two ways to get into the camera settings beyond the physical buttons of the camera. The menu button is the deep dive. The most important one is format card. The quick menu is where you're going to get to the settings that you probably need to change the most often and the most frequently. If you ever do have questions, check with your teacher, or you can certainly look online and check the manual as well.